Hi, my name's John Hendricks. I am the chair of the MFA Illustration and Visual Culture program at Washington University in St. Louis. Recently, I've gotten a lot of questions about what I think about artificial intelligence as it regards image making. Okay, so I have a lot of thoughts. I wanted to share a few of them today. This is a talk I gave at the Blind Spots Conference at WashU in November of 2023. I've updated a little bit, but I wanted to share with you what I think is ultimately some good news for illustrators in regards to artificial intelligence. Okay, again, my name's John Hendricks, and of course, I'm going to start with talking about AI in the place that makes the most sense, which is baseball. Okay, so in the last few years in baseball, baseball has been like miserable to watch, thanks to applications of data, like massive sets of data, like sabermetrics, defensive shifting, launch angle. All these efficiency-driven strategies have led to this problem called the three true outcomes. Once lauded as like the emerald chessboard, baseball previously to last season had been just like miserable to watch. In short, an innovation of technology and data basically ruined baseball for both the players and the viewers. But with declining ratings, Major League Baseball made some changes. And the three true outcome problem was that basically everything in the game came down to either three things: a walk, a home run, or a strikeout. Or those things are not interesting to watch, basically. So they changed some rules and made it a little bit more advantageous to like bunt, to like steal bases, hit a single, throw a pickoff, move to first, all that stuff. And it made the game more balanced, more human, and most of all, like more fun. So I think the dialogue about artificial intelligence in the field of illustration has basically fallen into this kind of three true outcome trap. So basically, simplistic and unnuanced conversation about AI art making is not helping illustrators. And it's especially not helping anyone outside of our community. Now, I do believe, before I get comments, that there is absolutely a clear need for activism on the topic of AI, but it has to be grounded in something beyond just this one-dimensional caricature of our worst fears. It will help our case if we can make those unfamiliar with illustration best practices, if we are very targeted and thoughtful with our objections. Okay, so basically, my theory with this problem relates around the phrase tool, trend, tragedy. I actually think that this three true outcome trap has caused illustrators to think of illustration in regards to AI in one of these three categories. And I actually don't think it is helpful for the conversation. So again, I am not an expert in this. I am not a programmer. I'm not a digital technician. I am an educator. I make drawings and I teach people about making drawings. And so that's where these thoughts are coming from. So think of this as a kind of New York Times think piece regarding AI. So now the phrase artificial intelligence can now refer to an enormous set of technologies, large language models like ChatGPT, but AI can also apply to like deepfake videos and huge concerns around the application of AI to like government surveillance, especially when it comes to facial recognition with Clearview AI. But today, mostly what I'm talking about is image making AI platforms like Midjourney, DALL-E, Stable Diffusion, Canva, Firefly. And first of all, I don't have any real answers, but my brief hope is that I think if we modestly explore the stuff around AI art generation, I can help you and your students at least ask the right questions. So primarily, what does this technology say about our future career as illustrators? And I actually believe there is good news at the end of this talk. Okay. Being fearful in general is rarely a helpful response, nor is it uncommon when we meet new technology. When we get a disruptive tool set, you often hear things like this from Henrietta Klopath. Some people seem to think that when the process has been perfected and made common enough, the artist will have nothing more to do. Now, you may have suspected that Henrietta was not talking about AI, but instead was talking about the camera. This is from Brush and Pencil magazine. First of all, why don't we still have Brush and Pencil magazine? But second of all, history can actually teach us about our moment. But before we think just a little bit about the history question, how it regards this current moment, I actually have a sort of absurd suggestion. I propose that we set aside in this conversation the issue of ethics. Now, that may seem ridiculous because to many, the entire crux of the problem surrounding AI generated images is its ethical violations. And I totally agree. It's true that nearly all of the most popular AI art creation platforms scrape the data of billions of images they don't hold the rights to, nor do they credit artists, let alone pay any kind of compensation. In fact, even the more responsibly generated platforms like Firefly from Adobe have come under scrutiny for not exactly living up to their own standards. So, but this talk is really not about the ethics question, only for these four reasons, if you'll indulge me. There really is no good counter argument. I think we can all agree that those of us who are image makers and artists, that using images you do not own to create images from those images without attribution, usage agreement, or payment is not a sustainable or justifiable practice. Two, recent decisions in the US judicial system have upheld that AI-produced images, even images who have been later retouched by a human hand, are not able to hold a copyright. This image, Recent Entrance to Paradise, was ruled to be uncopyrightable, even though the system that the person created to build this image was their own creation. The system itself was theirs, but they still cannot hold a copyright on this image because it was, quote, absent any human involvement, the particular creation of this image. And in another very famous example, Jason Allen, a Colorado-based artist who became famous for winning the Colorado State Fair, submitted his second request to the Copyright Board for authorship and full copyright on this image, was also denied. In the board's view, Mr. Allen's actions describe what he described doing to this image, even the retouching, does not make him the sole author of this Midjourney image. All he did was write text in it and then retouch it. So again, these two things are very interesting in regards to copyright. Third, I actually think that this moment might be an example when big corporations will actually help out the little guys a little bit. There is so much IP dollars at stake for places like Disney, Universal, Paramount, that I actually think we are going to see some major action at the federal level to put some guardrails around these platforms, at least in the United States. And hopefully, once the United States does that, other countries will follow suit. And actually, believe it or not, I think this part of it will get figured out. These massive rights holders with extremely deep pockets, and that is the important part, have way too much to lose for this to be just the Wild West much longer. Now, if you are doubting my my premise here, I might give you the example of Napster. It's not a perfect example, and it's a complicated story, but Napster's early rise in the 2000s basically portended the end of all music rights holders, and eventually it was sorted out, and we have actually a better industry in music today because of Napster. And four, with each passing day, as AI becomes better at its job, the tools to fight back become more and more sophisticated. There are lots of things out there today. One called Glaze, which is an application that allows artists to sort of mask their own voice in their work. Another one called Nightshade debuted recently, which poisons the data inside of the training model. And what's kind of amazing about that is you can't extract the poison data because it goes into the black box, and the data programmers themselves don't even know how to parse out the stuff that is good and the stuff that is bad because it's all a black box in there. So for me, the true sticky wicket, if we can move from baseball to cricket for some reason, are the questions hiding behind the ethical concerns. So these tools are not going to go away. And once there exists a model of AI image creation that is fair and regulated, And you may think, how is that even possible? Well, there are some illustrators working on a model right now, a startup that would actually have name brand illustrators buy in at the level of letting an AI train on their work and then getting paid per usage of that AI creation based on their work. So if we put our outrage aside for just a moment, when the time comes that these tools are governed responsibly, or if they never are, how are we supposed to think about them? Now, if you haven't played around with these tools, they are extremely good at visual problem solving, way better than you might think. Even the recent debut of OpenAI's Soma, which is a text to video AI tool, they're obviously getting better and figuring out how to do this stuff at a much better rate. Now, I think if your temptation is to panic, I get it. I do understand that. In fact, I feel some of that from time to time. But I just want to remind you that the humble ATM machine once caused such a panic in the 1960s that people projected entire banking industries would be out of work within 5 years. So one of the phenomenons in technology is the first 80% is very easy to achieve, and the final 20% is quite difficult. We've seen this recently with automated self-driving cars. It seemed like 5 years ago that by 2025, we were all going to be in self-driving cars, but it's proved a lot more difficult. Once that initial kind of wow factor wore off, it's proved a lot difficult to finish that final 20%. And I actually think we're kind of reaching the peak of what these software platforms are able to do within their limitations. But technopanic is just a cycle of human behavior. Of course, fear sells more than newspapers. We know that. But again, I've selected this idea of tool trend tragedy, but basically because it fits my baseball analogy, but mostly because I think these are the categories we think of AI in, just sort of reflexively. Or actually, if you've not thought about AI much, or maybe if you think about it all the time, your categories might be simply good and evil. Well, okay, for starters, tools are not evil. It's how we use those tools. And secondly, I don't think we really know what AI is capable of just yet. So is AI image generation the latest chapter in a familiar cycle of skepticism and fear surrounding emergent technology? And as we look back on some examples from the past, you may look through these and sort of quibble with my categorization. Which are they? Are they a tool? Are they a trend? Are they a tragedy? Well, you may be thinking artificial intelligence is not either of those things. It's a brand new category. So, yes, I think you are right. And you may actually have already arrived at my conclusion that artificial intelligence is, of course, all three of those things at once. But how do we know which parts are which? What can artists legitimately use as a tool? What will be just a trend that we don't see sustaining past the next few years? And most importantly, what is really at risk? So let's take each three of these categories separately for just a moment. Imagine someone came up to you and said, "Hi, I have an amazing new tool. It's called the New Hammer. First of all, it's totally free. Not only will this hammer build your entire house, but it will design it too. In all, like just like 100th of the time." Okay, so your very first thought when you hear this proposition is that, did a hammer write this? Who benefits from framing a tool set in this particular way? Okay, so you need to be skeptical of those claims, first of all. But let's dwell on the nature of tools. A tool inside the drawing world and image making world, a tool elevates one particular function or art action. The tool makes it easier and more efficient. The tool provides advantages, but also it provides simultaneous limitations. So it's one thing I've noticed recently in the transition for students making work when they come to art school, having been mostly on paper versus mostly in a digital world, is that students tend to recognize that Fresco and Procreate automatically raise the floor of what's capable. But what they don't often recognize is that the ceiling has also been lowered simultaneously with these tool sets. So despite Mr. Hammer's persuasive campaign, we can't build an entire house with a hammer. You need a lot of different tools that do very different things, and you need a skilled craftsperson to use those tools. So just as an example, a friend of mine, Jamie Zollers, has been using and experimenting with Midjourney as a tool to like give comping ideas. Now, she's not really done anything with this, but she's been curious enough to just say, could this be possibly part of my process? Um, and she doesn't use the output itself. She just kind of feeds it into the machine to let the brain spit out other things that maybe she wasn't thinking about. Uh, and it's an interesting idea. In fact, a lot of these things, in general, if you could think of them as a category, they might be called sort of centaurs. This was a thing that came up in chess, actually, after Deep Blue beat Garry Kasparov in 1997. It began this sort of new concept called freestyle chess, which allows humans and computers to work together in playing a chess game. What they figured out that the computers are really good at is recognizing patterns of play, but they are not good at what psychologists call transfer, which is the idea of taking one set of solutions and applying it to like a different context. And this is something that a human brain is extremely good at. Okay, now let's think about AI as a trend and take a little step back. As we frame tools and practices in the context of 21st century illustration, you can also think back to the long history of illustrators. And what are the things that illustrators have almost always valued universally? Well, there was fashion, of course. We're very trendy. We have to be to make work in a contemporary space and to get calls. We want to be efficient. We want to move quickly. We've always embraced technology, and we're extremely pragmatic. So on the surface, you might think AI should be something that illustrators really, really support and would be embracing. But of course, you are forgetting a thing that the illustrator has been historically most interested in, and that is, of course, getting paid. The reason we are hired is for a very particular value proposition. So let me explain it this way with this chart. With AI, of course, we have things that are fast and free, and they are extremely accessible as a general concept. And on the human side of things, we're of course slow, we're expensive, but we are extremely agile and very particular. So the things we make are very specific to ourselves. So now, why exactly would Nike use AI to create the final art for an uncopyrightable campaign image when they're releasing their brand new Jordans or whatever? I just don't think that's a real practical solution for a big company like Nike. Now, where I think they will use this is advertising agencies will use AI to like comp something up for that kind of thing. And they'll eventually hand that to an illustrator to make it look, again, customized and to make it look expensive and to make it look very particular. So if you had to generalize sort of all these things together, you might say that AI creates a kind of gross accuracy versus illustration made by human beings as a fine imprecision. And just let me give you some examples of this. There is a kind of gross, as in like gross motor, as in like large, it's also kind of gross as well, as you'll see here. But it sort of is good at taking the big sense of it and sort of making it work, even though when you scrutinize it, it's extremely disturbing. Here's another example where you're like, oh, cool, I see the shape there, but when you get close, it just doesn't quite hold up. And there's a kind of uncanny valley with some of this stuff, as opposed to fine imprecision, which could be like Eleanor Davis or Shel Silverstein or Jules Feiffer, where the sort of perfect imprecision of the human hand is kind of not replicable by machines. So the technicians and designers in Silicon Valley, I think they typically know that what they're making is really kind of a demo baby. That's like a term out there for like something that really looks good on stage, but actually does not have a ton of real world application, or at least not without a lot of help. And I think AI is kind of in that category and will be for a while. I have heard from very knowledgeable art directors that the belief is that the people really commissioning this stuff are, or commissioning using AI, are people that would not have commissioned art to begin with. And there's even a social pressure to kind of say no to AI art, as seen from the Marvel Disney Plus show Secret Invasion, which you did use this sort of extruded slop that they probably retouched anyway in their title credits, and it was a notable PR disaster. I wonder if actually someday we may think of AI art making as we do like smoking. Like we all know that as a daily habit and a regular practice, it's like super bad for you, but like, once in a while, an occasional drag of AI may be fine. Now, for me, I can spot AI art pretty easily. Now, you may immediately come back to say, yes, but the general public can't. Well, what I would also tell you is the general public is not commissioning images. The art directors and editors and designers that are really commissioning illustration, they know this stuff, what this stuff looks like. They can spot it too. Now, eventually, I do think we are going to have software on our phones that scans all images for traces of digital manipulation and highlighting fakes. I think this is something that is responsible and that tech companies are developing right now. Now, regardless of that, digital visual literacy is a tool that like we absolutely need to teach and to be thinking about, which is why we have to move to our last category, and that is that AI is going to be a tragedy. Let me frame it like this. Has IKEA made the world a better place? Has IKEA been good for the history and legacy of furniture design? So even putting ethical or sustainability concerns aside, the AI revolution is going to involve loss. And actually, I don't even know the answer to that IKEA question. Like, yes, I'm putting together a bookcase that looks pretty nice, and I paid $59 for it, but that's at the cost of somebody making me a beautiful bookcase by hand. So it's inevitable that there will be something and someone who will pay the cost for AI. And I think it's easy to make a case that name brand illustrators are going to be fine. There's no question that some artists in the middle, though, are going to lose work. Comps for advertising, storyboards, every sector of commercial art could be disrupted by sort of cheap, adequate, on-demand images. Now, how much? Again, we sort of don't know. But if you will allow me to speculate, I think I can help you ensure your own protection a little bit. So I believe the area under largest threat from AI is not necessarily in the realm of art, but in content. Okay, so there are these sort of two worlds that I want you to think about: beauty and commerce. On the art creation side, in the beauty side, the goals are personal. The art is about sort of the sublime, and the thing that is made is the art itself. Whereas in the content creation side, the goals are more corporate. The ultimate outcome is that for it to be entertaining and ultimately for you to purchase something that benefits the company funding that activity. Now, of course, the beautiful thing about illustration is that it exists between these spaces, and it's probably why we love illustration so much. And there's really no tradition in illustration. I want you to remember that. It's not a stable practice through time. I think good advice for you is to try to make things that are a little more beautiful than about commerce, and especially to do projects where you are both the writer and the illustrator. That is one way to ensure that no one can duplicate what you have to offer in the world. I actually think you should all aspire to make things that are just a little bit more art than content. But actually, the one advice I would have is that drawings on paper are about to be worth a lot of money. So I would go all in on your ink on paper futures, actually. That's going to prove very profitable in about 5 years. Now, one thing that's important to remember is that activism really does work. Public service education changes cultures. I think back to the founding of ICON. the Illustration Conference. Back in the 1990s, illustrators came together to rebut the rise of stock illustration. And the community of illustration, including concerned art directors and designers, basically shut down an entire business model because, one, the illustrators felt it was unethical, and two, the images were just terrible. So believe it or not, though, I'm not worried. If history teaches us one thing, it's that artists always find the seam in the culture's armor. And for people in suits asking the question, what is the value add for a human being in art making? Well, I actually feel sorry for you. So I'd like to give you a few words of hope to think about as you frame this for your students, or as you frame it for yourself when thinking about AI. So I have learned over the course of teaching for 18 years now that there are a few universal laws of art making, as immutable and dependable as the laws of thermodynamics. And I will be quoting this wonderful book by Robert Farrar Capon called Supper of the Lamb, which is a cookbook, but it's really not a cookbook. It's a cookbook about loving making things. So the first law I'm going to remind you of is that good art resists being made. What is good is difficult, and what is difficult is rare. Second of all, there are no true shortcuts. He says this: technique must be acquired, and with technique, a love of the very process of cooking. No artist can work simply for results. He must also like the work of getting them. And finally, friction is formation, and it is not optional. Interest in results never conquer boredom with process. As those of you who know me or know my work, you probably know that drawing for me is not a result, but a process. Drawing is an associative space for me. I get ideas from the slow, tedious labor of sitting with a drawing and letting it speak to me. In fact, the drawing act itself is the secret sauce. Its inefficiency is what makes the work practical. Looking back over that list of technology, do you really believe deep down that any new innovation can stop human beings from drawing in the sand with a stick? It's one of the things I love about drawing. It really can't be optimized. Making things is a whole act of personhood that actually rewards swinging for the fences. Creating things is like a subtle game. It's played in this raw and risky present moment of your heart and your mind and your hand. So you have to ask yourself, is the point of playing a game merely the result, the final score? Or is there something sort of irreplaceable about the play itself? So the magic of our field, illustration, is that it is a place where you can make an unforced error. Errors are actually essential to the game. Somehow when you boot that watercolor wash into the outfield, the chaos that can lead to that outcome you didn't expect can be completely magical. That's the best kind of feeling in a drawing, the unexpected victory, the walk-off, if you will, when all hope was lost. The mess is the art. So you may ask, why do we play? To win? No, you make art because you play for the love of the game. I hope this can encourage you and give you some things to think about as you start to talk about AI, teach AI, and think about what it means for your life as an artist and an illustrator. Thanks. Bye-bye.